soul and how we get into that spaciousness part of the soul and why it's important. And then I'll be giving a description of the Clearness Committee, and which is going to come a little bit later in the day. So at noon, I'm pleased to welcome my friends who are in my Parker Palmer Circle of Trust. Kathy O'Connor would be with us today, except that she is battling an illness, and so she is with us in spirit. Steph Kirby, Diane Rudebach, and our Parker Palmer mentor, our dear Elaine Sullivan, who is here with us today. And we're going to give you a sampling of what Clearness Committee is. And just a short definition, Clearness Committee is a way of getting to the bottom of ourselves, to explore what is hidden within us. So that comes at 12 o'clock to 1:30. Then at 1:30, I'm very pleased to be welcoming Dr. Steve Orwig. And Steve, thank you for being here today, and Kate also, to be running our Zoom meetings. And Steve is the Dean of the Iona School of Formation in the Diocese of Oklahoma. And in so many ways, he was instrumental in forming that school, which prepares people for holy orders. And so he's going to be giving us a history of the Iona schools and how they are going to overlap. And so that's going to give us an idea of our lineage and how we fit into the broader picture of things. Okay, so let us start then with the agenda sheet that looks like this. And what I want to do is just page through it all, so we're all getting together right here at the first. So you'll see that the agenda is broken down into time categories, and we're going to do our best to stay true to that. And you'll see then that there are reflection questions that are built right into the agenda. So you'll want to know where those are, so that when it comes time in this first hour to use them, you will have them right down there before you. Now, after following the agenda, we have a quote from Thomas Merton, one of my favorites. And so Thomas Merton always gives us plenty of really good reflection materials, and we're going to be using that quote as we get into the hour, so keep that handy as well. Now, following the quote, you will see the touchstones, and the touchstones are right out of Parker Palmer. And students, you were given another version of the touchstones on our retreat day, and they have the same, it's the same information as what you're looking at today, but just a little bit different format. And our school is going to be built around the touchstones because so much of what we do as directors is about creating safe space for another soul. And the touchstones are very good at giving us a tool for how to do that. So the students were asked to review the touchstones before we began today, and I thank you for doing that. And then we all will review them again to use for our Clearness Committee, because the Clearness Committee is built on the touchstones as well. So following the touchstones, you'll see the schedule of teaching and learning modules, and this will take you all the way through until May, which is the first term. And I would say that this is a work in progress. It's a living, breathing, changing organism, and I think the slots are more or less, that's what it's going to be, but some things may shift and change as we move along. Now, supplemental materials. Supplemental materials are going to be given out following the class and following today's class. And for this first time, I'm going to be sending them to you by email and probably on Monday. And so it is just in case some topic draws your attention and you want to explore it further. And you can look at the supplemental materials to know how to do that. Now, after Monday, we are going to be opening a Google Doc portal for everyone. And so at the time I send you the emails, we're going to be opening the Google Doc portal. So don't worry about how you're going to do that, because we have Kate Houston. She's going to be there to lead you through. And I think, let's see, is there a chat? Oh, I haven't even looked at the chat, but I think probably she is going to be giving us, oh, I just see where, okay, I've got to stop right here because I see that Diane Ellsworth, our dear Diane Ellsworth, has died this morning. We're going to stop right now and we're going to hold Diane in our hearts. And we're going to ask, let me just say a prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for giving us Diane to be with us as friend and companion on this earth. We lift her up into your loving arms and we ask for your angels to take charge of her soul. Move her from strength to strength in your presence. Help her to see that brightness of your light, that she might know the direction to go. Comfort all who are mourning the loss of her, dear sweet soul. We ask these things in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
I will say, this is technically not public information yet. So if you all could just keep it quiet and close to your hearts until the diocese can get an announcement out. She was scheduled to retire on December 31st and has been in the hospital with COVID and passed away this morning. And we were informed earlier this week that it was likely going to happen. And it's been a very difficult week for those of us in the office who worked with Diane for so many years. And so, and for those of you who've known Diane for so many years. So if you guys could just keep it quiet until we can get our announcement out to the diocese, I would appreciate
we will
it.
do that, and we do appreciate knowing that we will hold her closely in our hearts. Thank you. So just returning then to the supplemental materials, once we get that set up for you, everything will go into the portal. So you need to practice doing that because assignments will go in there, notices will go in there, supplemental materials, everything will go into the portal. So contact Kate to do that. Do you have your email somewhere on there, Kate? Okay, thank you. All right, so let's just jump right into it then. And in the book, in Hidden Wholeness, Parker Palmer's Hallmark book, he gives this great metaphor about being at home. He talks about being at home in contrast to being lost. And in his metaphor, he talks about home as, or at least how I envision it, as a place of safety, a place of warmth, a place where we can just let our hair down and feel good and relaxed. And lost, on the other hand, is about a place where we can't see. We don't know where we are. We can't figure it out. And even though we may just be a few feet away from home, we just can't get there. So he says that finding our way home sounds like something that we ought to be able to do, but sometimes it is just elusive. And I remember when we lived in Rivendell and all the street lights went out and it was storming, and I just lost my bearings, and I was only a block from home, but I missed the turn and I just could not figure it out. I couldn't figure out how to get home. So sometimes, in a very practical and real sense, it is very elusive to find the way home. And he talks about Midwestern blizzards, and that sometimes in the Midwest blizzard that there can be a whiteout condition. And he talks about farmers who would try to go from the back door of their house to the barn, and that they would get lost. And even being a few feet from home, they couldn't see, and that farmers would die of exposure. So they learned from that what to do. And what to do was to tie a rope from the house to the barn so that they can get home, so they can find their way home. So let's go a little deeper into the metaphor, and let's ask about home. What is home? What is home base for us in the spiritual sense? What is home, and where is home, and how do we know we are there? So from our touchstone sheets, Parker Palmer says home is that place of our inner selves, the place of our hearts, the place of our souls. In Thomas Merton language, I think it would be the place where our true self resides. People call it different things, but it's sort of, we're talking about the same thing. And Teilhard de Chardin, in our opening retreat, we talked about our within. And so for Teilhard, that place of home, he would call our within, our thoughts, our feelings, how we respond to our environment, and that sort of thing. The place of where we are with God. So spiritual direction is about our finding out what home is and where home is, and then tying a rope so that we don't get lost. Now, remember that this program is Ignatian based, which is why everyone who comes to this program is required to take the Ignatian exercises. So Ignatius said that we are not contemplatives just for the sake of our own enjoyment of God. Now, enjoyment of God is very important. We need to have enjoyment of God. We need to be in that place of God. But what Ignatius said is that we are contemplatives in action. So everything that we are, when we come to God and build up that home base within us, we are meant to carry it out into the world. And remember what Bishop Colson said on our retreat day, that if we only do the contemplative meditative part, which can be so enjoyable for us, that we're missing half of the equation. So this school is going to be about how do we serve? How do we learn? How do we teach and learn? And then we're going to do something with it. So pushing our metaphor then even a little bit more, home is the place of contemplation and meditation. And let's say that the barn is the place of action. Parker talks about our roles in life, the roles that we play. I am a priest, a spiritual director, that is a role. The rope then is our method by which we go from what is in our soul to our role, going from soul to role. Teilhard would say we have a within, which is our soul. We have a without, which is the physical part of us and the roles we play. And how do we make this incongruity? And Merton would say, I think that calls that our integrity, when our soul and our role, or soul and our actions meet up together, that we are in integration with ourselves. So already I want to charge you 12 as to begin to ponder this, that how are you going to use this teaching and learning adventure of being a part of this school to serve the world? What is going to be your action? And I think it begins in the congregation, so start there. So here's an assignment for you. Between now and our next meeting in February, I want you to begin that dialogue with yourself and with your director about your vision of how you might want to take it to the world. Now, don't worry about this too much. It may not be very well formed, and it might change a little bit or it might change a whole lot. But now is the time already to begin to dream about that. And I know I've already talked with some of you about leading Ignatian groups coming up a little bit later in the year. And so that's one idea. That is an idea of service. And so begin to think about what you might want to do with your congregations. So now let's return to our Parker metaphor and go back and ask this question more deeply. Where is home for us in that contemplative, meditative sort of way? We all need to know what that is for ourselves. I need to know what it is for me, and you need to know about what it is for you. So I'm going to tell you how I locate home. The question for you is, how do you define it for you? So I was talking this over with with Ann Luther. Ann Luther founded the spiritual direction program at Notre Dame. And this was right as COVID was hitting. So it was back in early March. And my dear friend Steph Kirby, who's the most generous person I know, made it possible for me to meet with Ann Luther. So she had two questions for me. And the first one was, how do I know when I'm in the presence of God? What is it like for me when I'm in the presence of God? So I answered this way, that the best way I can sort of say it is that from my point of view right now, I'm here on earth, a point and place right here on earth, looking outward. There is the universe that expands outwardly. There is the earth, and then the skies and the stars. And the universe opens more and more broadly, just opens up into an infinite kind of way. How I know I'm in the presence of God is that same expansion of the universe, except that it happens in an interior way. That same sense of spaciousness that expands from our interior, it's boundless. That sense of that we can't get to the bottom really of our soul ever, because it's that same kind of interior spaciousness. That place of us that is of God. It's not of ego, but of God, which is a very different feeling, a different way of being. So I'm learning a new kind of theological language, Teilhardian, I guess I would call it. And I think that my spiritual director, Bob Gardenhire, would say that's a very Teilhardian way to look at God's presence as expansion of the universe outwardly and inwardly. So then her second question, Ann Luther, was, when was my first memory of being in that space? Well, I knew instantly. It was when I was about 2 or 3 years old. Actually, my first memory as a human being, when my parents took me to the ocean, and that salt water saturated the air. Those Gulf waters, I still remember it. The color of slate blue gray, and it was just calling to me, beckoning to me. And I felt compelled, absolutely compelled, to throw myself into those waters headlong. I wanted to get as close as I could. If I could immerse myself completely in those waters, I would have, because I knew, something within me knew without a doubt, that I was a drop of that salt water, and a drop of that salt water within the greater ocean waters, and connected to every bit of ocean that there is. So I toddled into those waters as fast as my toddler legs would carry me, and I didn't want anything holding me back, and I didn't want anyone holding me back. I had a talk with my mother yesterday, And I asked her if she remembered that, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I sure do, because we had to chase you. You were going so fast to prevent you from just going all the way out there." And I do remember hearing her footsteps slapping the wet sand, chasing after me so I wouldn't drown. But they were absolutely laughing and smiling and delighted that as well. So then, when are other times that I feel that interior space opening up? Uh, and I have to say that it is when in the presence of someone dying or someone who has just died. And this always comes as a surprise for me. I can never plan for this to happen, but it's an experience of, and it doesn't happen every time, but it's happened frequently enough, of being absolutely present in that moment, and the death opening like a gate. The moment opens up into a grandeur. And again, it is that sense of all things being connected to all things, everyone to everyone, every soul to every soul, where we are right now in our soul connected to Diane's soul as she enters heaven. So C.S. Lewis also talked about that, that sense of being highly connected to God and to all things in his book, Surprised by Joy. And he says that there was a moment for him when he was about 6 or 7, and his little brother brought a toy garden into their children's playroom, and that he was lifted up into some kind of unspeakable joy, into this love that was so absolutely profound that all of life was complete for him in that moment of being a part of the greater love of God. I love reading about his experience of that. So again, we cannot control any of these experiences. We cannot make it happen. This experience of soul homecoming. And as the great theologian Frederick Buechner says to us, we can't stay there forever. We can only get a glimpse of it every here and there, every now and then, is the way he puts it. So if we can't control it, what can we do? Well, we can be attentive to the motions of the soul. We can pay attention. I believe that the world of spiritual direction, whether we're on the giving or receiving end of it, it helps us to be aware, helps us to pay attention. I am so privileged to have been in an excellent 5-year training program under the direction of Mary Diane Stelton Camp, and who is an excellent teacher that helped us in all kinds of ways in learning how to be a spiritual director. So now this brings us close to our first reflection question. And again, it's right there printed for you on your agenda. And it concerns our turning points. So Parker says that sometimes the way home is hidden from us, but that we can have glimpses. And many theologians say we have these glimpses that can come from the yearnings of our hearts, so that we need to pay attention to the yearnings of our hearts. And various theologians have said that. Our dear friend J. Philip Newell from over in Scotland says this all the time, that we have a homesickness. We have a homesickness. And from those yearnings of our heart, if we can follow them, if they're real yearnings of the heart, we can move deeper and deeper into realms of home, and that we need to be attentive to our turning points. And the turning points are those events that unfold that bring us closer. So when I was a harpist many years ago, there was a time when I figured out how to make a lot of money playing the harp. And I know it was more money than the musicians who were a regular part of the Oklahoma City symphony and who had teaching studios because I know how much they made. And so I was making a lot, and I became lost in that money making because that became really important to me because I could buy things with it, like a house. So somewhere along the line, though, I lost touch with that aspect of the holy that music had provided me. It was for me a sense of the holy always playing music. And I distinctly remember just a time when realized I was just going through the motions of playing background music in a hotel. And this yearning of my heart, I couldn't make it stop. It was a yearning to get back to a place where I could be in touch with that aspect of the holy. And then I needed to think about a different way how to make money. So I was not in church at that time. I'd left the traditional church. And so this yearning was getting stronger. And it finally led me to a conversation that I had at the Dunkin' Donuts shop in Norman, Oklahoma one day. And it was with my good friend Jan Berge, who was a strong Christian. And I think I was probably telling her about this yearning for the holy. And then I began laying out for her all the reasons why the church was not for me, all of the reasons why I would absolutely not return to church. All of my reasons, though, it was my own fabrication and it was my own assumptions. So one by one, she countered all of these assumptions, saying, well, I don't know where you got that idea, or that's not like any church I know. This conversation was deeply, deeply centered, and it was a fierce conversation centered in truth. Now, I don't mean fierce in any way that is scary or threatening or menacing or dominating or cruel in any way, but fierce in the way of challenging my assumptions in a way that my own reality was interrogated. And at the end of that 5-minute conversation, I was turned around and I was converted. And I knew I had to get to a church fast. It was on a Wednesday, and Sunday could not come fast enough because something about that instinctively I felt was home, and I had to get there. There's an obscure bishop by the name of William Ullathorne that comes to us from the 19th century. It's another story how Ullathorne came into my life, but he says that we look at our conversion moments in retrospect. It's only in retrospect we know if it really was a moment of change because we look and see what happened after that. So only in retrospect did I see that this really was God working into my life. It was a turning point that held true because I've never left the church since that Sunday in Easter in the 1980s when I first set foot back into the church. And it was St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Norman, Oklahoma. And life has never been the same since. So one of the recent treasures of my heart, I have 3 current mentors. Elaine Sullivan in Dallas is my Parker Palmer mentor. Bob Gardenhire in Oklahoma City is my Teilhard mentor. And Carol Pinkham Oak is my Virginia Seminary mentor who invited me into a program called Thriving in Ministry, through which I'm learning about fierce conversations. So Susan Scott has written a book called Fierce Conversations. And again, in this context, fierce, we challenge our own assumptions about that word. We're not talking about a scary, threatening, or dominating thing, but fierce in the way that it has these elements: robust, intense, strong, passionate, eager, unbridled, uncured, untamed. fierce conversation has some risk to it because I think it puts us out there into the unknown, puts us in touch with our vulnerability. So we don't have to do it. No one could ever make us have a fierce conversation. But my spiritual director, Bob, asked me not too long ago when I was bemoaning this or that, well, Susan, do you want to have a learning spirituality? Do you want that? Because no one's going to make you have it. But if you want to have a learning spirituality, then you're going to need to examine your assumptions and your beliefs. So as I look back at that turning point conversation that got me back into the church, it had what fierce conversations do. And fierce conversations do four things. They interrogate reality, they provoke learning, they tackle our toughest challenges, and they enrich relationships. Isn't that just wonderful that we can have this process of going deeper into ourselves, and it's also relationally enriching. So fierce conversation in this model, Parker Palmer is always urging us to have a metaphor. And so how I think a fierce conversation is like this, the best I can come up with is that peaceable kingdom. The lion and the lamb snuggling up together, the wolf and the lamb grazing together, the fierceness of the lion or the wolf and the gentleness of the lamb working together. That's nothing short of miraculous. So here we are, we've arrived at our first reflection question, and it is, what is the history of your turning points, the events that brought you closer to God? And was there a fierce conversation that went with it? Maybe the fierce conversation was with you and God, but was that an element of it? So I'm going to leave you with this reflection question on your own for a few minutes, and then we'll come back. So I'm going to bring us back now, knowing that you can go back to your journaling at a later time. So we're going to take a different path now, and although it's related, and this has to do with living with our contradictions. So since we're going to be looking at the Book of Common Prayer all the way through this school, let us first get in our mind's eye the two major feast days, the feast day of Good Friday on the one hand, and the feast day of Easter Vigil on the other hand. So Good Friday, we know, is the ultimate pouring out of life. There is an end to it, and the end is death. Easter Vigil, on the other hand, notes the very beginning of the flame igniting new life, which moves us forward. And they contradict each other. Yet, all of our Christian story is about both. And without Easter, Good Friday would be meaningless death, and without Good Friday, Easter would be shallow. So you 12 students were asked to review all of the rules of discernment together in the Ignatian textbook that we use in Central Oklahoma called Ignatian Adventure. And the rules are all about working with our contradictions. Now, my dearly beloved director, Sister Benedicta, who has gone on to God's greater kingdom, 16 years ago, she gave me in our group this way of doing the examen that we hold our right hand out, and in our right hand out, being out, we hold on to our consolations, the moments that we've had of blessings where grace has touched our lives. Then we hold out our left hand, and in the left hand, we hold those moments, the concrete moments where we have gone against the grain of grace and our desolations. And after we've held our consolations in our right hand, our desolations in our left hand, we bring both hands together in a posture of prayer. Our Easter moments and our Good Friday moments together, we go right through the center, offering it all up to God, the totality of who we are. So in the examen, we're holding the tensions of our contradictions. And it's been said that Ignatius was way ahead of his time in giving us the examen. And modern psychology, I have learned recently, helps us to hold that tension of our contradictions. But Ignatius thought about this 500 years ago. So also, I want to say that it's not only the examen, but the colloquy that is also a way of looking at our contradictions. We, a line of dialogue, I say this, Jesus says that, and sometimes they are in contradiction. So Oklahoma City psychologist Harrison Smith has been so helpful to me in understanding things, and so glad he is on our faculty and will be with us in March along with Julaine Borth. And he opened my eyes when he gave a talk on dealing with our traumas. And he asked us to draw a vertical line if we have difficulty getting past our traumas. This is a way to do it. And on one side of that vertical line, we write down our trauma and we write all about it, anything we want to say about it. And on the other side of the vertical line, we talk back to the trauma. We sort of challenge that trauma. We challenge the assumptions that we have made about ourselves that we've experienced through that trauma. And Harrison says that in good mental health, that we need to learn to talk back to our traumas. Don't you love that? We need to talk back to our traumas. So we need to have a little fierce conversation with that trauma. And as directors and directors in training, we need to take a good hard look at our traumas. And why? Well, not only because it's good for us, but so that we can sit with another soul in their traumas. And I just believe that we can only go as deeply with another person to the extent that we have gone into that depth. So, so we do this work. Now, Harrison also says that in dealing with our conflicts, that when we cannot hold the tension, again, it's that holding the tension of our conflicts, that we tend to go into fight or flight. It's so uncomfortable for us, that tension, that we have to get away from the feeling. So we do that through addictive behavior, unhealthy fantasy, or anything we can to get rid of that discomfort. Or else we have to fight with someone to make sure that we are in the right. Or we can learn to hold that tension. So do your examine, do it daily, because we don't want to devolve into fight or flight. So in congregations, the unhealthy way this plays out is in triangulation, and triangulation is just deadly. And Tammy, who has taught CPE for 20 years, she knows all about this phenomenon. If you're not familiar with it, it goes like this. Party A has a strongly held view, and that view is in opposition to the view of Party B. So Party A feels like he or she is right and needs to win over Party B to beef up that sense of being right. But Party A does not have the means within themselves to do that. And Party B wants to hold just as firmly to their view, which is in opposition. So Party A goes to Party C to enlist support and is able to bring Party C over to their way of thinking. So now Party A feels much better because Party A has double strength, twice the strength as before. So now Party A is in a better position to win. Party B loses strength and either fades out or perhaps gets mad and goes and enlists help themselves. And so then we're back at it again. This is a deadly force because it kills life in congregations, and we always want to be aware of it happening. So Parker Palmer says that while we may not think of this kind of tactic or manipulation as violent, it is violent. Now, why is it violent? Because he says when parties are involved in win or lose tactics, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, that the soul, that part of us that we identify as our spiritual home base, finds it very hard to show up. And Parker says that something like triangulation or any of these win and lose tactics, it's peaceful violence. It's violence, but it's peaceful violence. And that our soul, which is very shy, shuts down in the face of any violence, whether it is peaceful or not. And this work that we do to become directors, to become skilled at this, what we want is for the shy soul to feel safe and to trust in the environment so that it can come out of itself. So we have teachers, we have really good teachers that are nonviolent change agents. We have Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Parker Palmer, and we have Jesus. So standing in the tragic gap is that place right in the middle of the tension. When we can hold the tension, when we can stand to do that by not forcing a resolution, we're not going to force a resolution for one side or the other to win or lose, but we hold that contradiction until a third way opens up for us. And it's hard to do it because it's so uncomfortable and we don't like holding that tension. But if we can stomach it, that incredible access to that hidden wholeness within us is revealed. So Susan Scott says, What we want to do is provide an environment in which the soul can come out from behind itself. Don't you just love that? I'm going to say it again. We want to provide an environment in which the soul can come out from behind itself. That shy soul can be seen and known. When we can do that, what Merton calls the true self can emerge. And so to do this work leads to true self. So, which brings us to the question, what is true self? And as far as I can tell, true self is named different things in different traditions. Quakers call it the light. Parker Palmer calls it the inner teacher. The Greeks call it the soul. It is that place of the interior home base. So let me leave you with the Merton quote is there. I'm not going to take the time to, to read it because we're already running behind. But we have this reflection question. And if you want to use the Merton quote to guide you, when have you been in the presence of your true self and how did you know it? And I'll leave you with that question for a couple of minutes. So I'm going to bring you back for the sake of time, knowing that you can go back to your journaling at another time. So this brings us to Clearness Committee. What is Clearness Committee? Well, Parker Palmer gives us a definition and he says this, that Clearness Committee is the finest school I know for watching the inner teacher at work and learning to ask honest, open questions. It's a discernment process called Clearness Committee. And he says that clearness has become standard practice in many circles of trust. And he says that that name makes it sound like it came from the 60s. And it did, the 1660s, all the way back then. It's held true, held up all the way since then. So Clearness Committee helps us do just that. It helps us achieve clarity. And how it originated is that Quakers needed a structure because they do not have clergy. And so we do it to ask open, honest questions to help do the job that some denominations have clergy to help. But Yet he says it's even beyond that. It's a focused microcosm of a larger circle of trust, a setting in which we have an intense experience of what it means to gather in support of someone else's inner journey. So I first saw Clearness Committee in action when Elaine Sullivan, and just a note about Elaine, she is just a remarkable person. I can't say enough about her. She's an author, a teacher, a mentor. She worked directly with Parker Palmer for years, and from that is a counselor, and she has helped so many lives. I am so grateful she's in my life. So Elaine taught us at her home in Dallas, and so we have a circle of four who were trained as facilitators together: Kathy O'Connor, Steph Kirby, Diane Rudebach, and me. So there is a focus person who presents something that they're wrestling with or need clarity about. And that first time, I was not even the focus person, and I was simply on the committee. And I was absolutely amazed at how much energy it took to listen deeply. We normally just listen, I think, at the surface, but to listen deeply is a different thing. And to keep to those touchstones, and to ask only open, honest questions. And I was also surprised at how profound the experience was for me as a participant. Again, even though I was not the focus person, I do think that when done right, done properly, that everyone can grow, whether you are the focus person or on the committee. Everyone can be more in touch with the deep interior of ourselves. So as I moved forward in the Parker Palmer training, I came upon two times when I knew that I needed clearness. And once when Elaine and Diane and I traveled to Kirkridge um, Historic Retreat Center in the Poconos Mountains. And it was to get clarity on my role. I was then priest in charge at St. Paul's, and to understand the dynamics a little bit better. Um, and it was very beneficial for me. The second time was when I was needing to make a decision on whether or not to do this school of spiritual direction. We'd already gotten permission to do it from the bishops. It was moving forward, but I knew no one could convince me of doing it. No one could be affirming enough unless I had the sense of that inner guide, because otherwise it was just going to be too hard. Couldn't do it. So I called for Clearness Committee, and I will never forget, we went through the whole thing and then getting finally to the bottom of me and saying, the answer to this question is yes. And it was absolutely heartfelt. Yes, there will be a school of spiritual direction. And yes, I do feel called to be the dean of the school. And now here we are. Now, part of the criteria for other people entering the school is that they're going to go through clearness before entering the school and also prior to receiving their letter of completion. I believe in it that much. So clearness is built upon the touchstones. And again, you've got that sheet with the touchstones. So always we take the time to review the touchstones. And that's what the preparation time is about. And no matter how well we know them or think we have them memorized, we go back and do it again. And usually the time for Clearness Committee is 2 hours. What we're going to give you today and the demonstration is a compressed version. So it looks like this. We gather together 4 to 6 trusted individuals. The focus person writes a statement of a problem or an issue, identifying the issue, offering background material on it, and giving clues about where we might be headed with the issue. So the group plus the focus person reviews the rules, and we always have a printed schedule. And if you look at the agenda sheet, it's right there. The printed schedule is there, and we will not vary from that. We sit in silence, and the silence is broken by the focus person who describes the issue, and there are no interruptions. questions only. No relating in a connective way, no jokes, no facial expressions of support. And the questions go through a filter before we ask them. A question should never be about satisfying my curiosity or wanting to know about, I want to know how that impacts me. No, it's only about the focus person, not the questioner. And questions are more about the person actually than the problem or the issue. And the focus person can say if a question being asked is not honest or open. And if that is said to us on the committee, uh, we are not allowed to have any kind of defensive explanation. Oh, well, I asked this question because da 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 da. No, we just take it humbly. Okay, it wasn't open and honest. Go back and try again. We are not to do any comforting. If the focus person cries, we do not hand a tissue because that's about me trying to be a good caregiver, and it breaks the engagement of the focus person with the inner teacher. Then we move into mirroring and more questions, and then affirmations and celebrations, and then the ending and a reminder of the confidentiality. So the focus person's goal is to communicate with their own inner teacher. What committee members think or feel about what is said is absolutely of no consequence. So why would we do this? What is it that's gained from Clearness Committee? What are some of the benefits? Well, I see it as a way of practicing holding those tensions, holding those contradictions, and allowing our heart to break, but the heart breaks in a very good and safe way that exposes the wounds and so that healing can be promoted. Um, Maybe you know the Hasidic tale of a rabbi who tells a disciple, we have wise words and we lay them upon the heart. And the disciple says, why do we not? Why do we lay them upon the heart? Why don't we lay them in the heart? And the rabbi says, we lay them on top of the heart because then the heart breaks and the words fall in. And the great American philosopher Kurt Vonnegut says this about that. And so it goes. And so it goes. That's the way it happens. Clearness is about a way of living into the questions that we have. It's a way of creating space for another person's soul to discover what it means to live non-violently. And the intensification of the circle of trust helps us get to the essence of ourselves. You may have read in the materials, I love this story of Parker Palmer. He tells it on himself when he decided he was going to become something. I think it was president of the university, but it was going against his grain. So he knew he needed Clearness Committee. So he went through Clearness Committee, and it was becoming rather obvious that it was maybe not something that was for him. And so a committee member said, so Parker, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to become the president of this university? And so Parker got very silent and he said, because I want to get my picture in the paper. So then there was no joking about that. There was just silence. And one of the committee members said, Parker, can you think of an easier way to get your picture in the paper? I just love that story. Clearance Committee, in that we get to practice a selflessness and we do gather in support of another person's soul. Why is it important for the Iona School of Spiritual Direction? Because that tool, the spiritual practice of clearness, will help us determine our true vocation. I think spiritual direction is a calling. as Bob says, a calling into a learning spirituality. And in a learning spirituality, we come to see our failures, our disappointments, our incompletions, the dreams that did not come true, all of this becomes our teachers. So circling back around to Ignatius, everything, he says, can be used for our spiritual gain, for our spiritual profit, both our consolations and our desolations. What is required of us is bringing it all before God with hands in a posture of prayer so that God may use it for the healing of the world. I want to ask from the students if we have any questions about Clearness Committee. Okay, if not, then we're going to move into a break time and we'll come back together at noon, and right at noon, the four of us will begin our preparation, and you all are there to observe that. And so the four of us will be unmuted and everybody else will be observing. Thank you and see you at noon.